Hi, I'm Darcel Lobo. I'm an attorney here in Seattle and I own Dow Law Firm. And today we're going to talk about what to do when a spouse passes away. And this is primarily targeted to the survivor spouse. Okay. And I'm making this video because there's been a number of occasions where I have a client come to me and a spouse has passed away. And a lot of times, maybe in a marriage, there's one spouse who handles the financial decisions, right? Handles the income, handles the investments, pays the bills. And if that spouse is the one who passes first, the survivor spouse sometimes has to figure out what to do with the finances. And these are sometimes immediate decisions that have to be made and figured out, right? And so the spouse is grieving the loss of the spouse that passed away, while simultaneously having legal issues, right? And having to figure out how to pay bills, what bills to pay, and how to handle various income sources and investments and bank accounts. And it's a lot. And so let's just kind of talk about and walk you through what to do, some initial steps, and how to get help, and just some kind of general guidance. Now, this video is for those of you who reside in Washington State, because I'm only licensed in Washington State, and that's where I'm speaking from, especially since we are a community property state that is unique to Washington. There's a handful of states in the country that have community property laws, but not all of them. So if you're not in Washington State, I'd encourage you to talk to an attorney licensed in your state. If you are in Washington, and you want some help kind of navigating what to do if a spouse passes away, this video is for you, and let's continue on. So we first want to understand community property. Community property in Washington State presumes, for the most part, that assets acquired during a marriage, whether they're in one spouse's name or the other spouse's name, belong to the marital community. Now, there are a few exceptions to that. So, of course, if you brought assets into a marriage and those are separate, if you had a prenuptial agreement that identified separate assets, if during the marriage you had an inheritance from someone, that's separate property unless you've commingled it and made it community property. Personal injury claims can be separate property. So there's a few exceptions. And so the first step is to kind of figure out, well, what's community and what's separate? For most of my clients, everything is community. For a lot of my clients who've been married for many years and the assets were acquired during the marriage, and if they're not already in both spouses' names, they would be deemed community property assets. So let's talk about some initial first steps. When a spouse has passed away, you're going to notify the financial institutions where that spouse had an account to let them know that that spouse passed away. But when you do so, depending on if it's an investment account or a checking or savings or some kind of credit account like a credit card or a line of credit or a loan, the financial institution may freeze or close that account. So you may not have, especially if it's a credit account, like a credit card or a personal loan, that account will probably be frozen and probably closed. And while that can be inconvenient for the survivor spouse, it's done to protect the decedent. Because unfortunately, we've seen a high number of instances of fraud where someone will, someone that's unknown to the decedent will incur a bunch of debt in that decedent's name and rack up debt and credit in that decedent's name. So they freeze and close the accounts to prevent that from happening. So just know that when you notify them about, again, on a credit card or a loan, that account may be frozen or closed. Now, if you are jointly on that account as well, that may not be the case. They may not freeze and close it because you're also on the account. They may be able to just remove the deceased spouse's name, but just be prepared that that could happen. Okay, so for bank accounts, for your checking and savings account, if you were both on that account together, you should be able to go into that financial institution and have your deceased spouse's name removed. Again, if it was acquired during the marriage, if it's community property, you should be able to provide a death certificate and have that spouse's name removed from the account so it's only in your name. This usually is easier with a more local bank, like a credit union. It's usually easier because they're more familiar with Washington state laws, community property laws. Sometimes your bigger banks, your national banks, you may have a more difficult time with because they are not as always well versed in Washington's laws and community property laws. If you have a community property agreement that says what's yours is mine and what's mine is yours, which is kind of the short of what that document says, that should make things a lot easier for you. If you don't have that, if you have a will or a trust that says everything goes to my spouse, that should resolve that. Or if you were named as beneficiary to your spouse's account, then that would resolve that. With a will, or if there is no will, no trust, no beneficiary, you're not on the account, you may find that the bank says, we need letters testamentary. And you're left to figure out, well, what is a letters testamentary? This was my spouse, this was our money. A letters testamentary is what you get when you open probate. Now, I try to help all my clients avoid probate when one spouse passes, because if everything is community property, in most cases, we should not need a probate. But there can be some circumstances when a probate is actually needed for a survivor's spouse. Now, if we do proper estate planning, then that should not be needed. But if there's not an estate plan, a lot of times clients will come to me after a spouse has passed and said, we wanted to get a will done, we wanted to get our trust done, we never got around to it. Then the spouse passes, and then the survivor spouse kind of has this little bit of a mess on their hands when it comes to the finances that we have to sort through and clear out. So we try to avoid probate, and in most cases we can, but sometimes we can't. And that's really going to be on a case-by-case unique basis. So if you need some help with that and analysis, if you need probate or not, that's more suited for a consultation with my office for me to kind of assess what's going on, what the assets are, and if you need probate or not. So after sorting through the initial finances and straightening out the bank accounts, the investments and retirements and life insurance policies and Social Security, there's a lot to be done when someone passes away. But so once we sorted through all of that, then we want to look at updating the survivor spouse's estate plan and updating their beneficiaries and their power of attorneys and their will or their trust, because a lot of times it had the survivor spouse named. But if that survivor spouse has predeceased you, well, then we need to look at, okay, well, who else are we going to name? Where is everything else going to go? Who do you want to be your power of attorney? Who's going to make decisions for you? And so we're a lot of times looking at updating those documents as well after a spouse has passed. And again, once we've gotten all the finances sorted out and gotten all the assets into the survivor spouse's name, and also real estate. I didn't mention real estate, but if we have both spouses on real estate, there's a couple things we can do to remove the deceased spouse from title. You'll want to do that as a surviving spouse and make things easier for whoever's going to inherit the estate from you upon your passing. If it's going to maybe your children, for instance, we want to remove the deceased spouse from title. If you already have a trust for your estate plan, we don't need to do it in that situation. Your trust should already provide for what happens upon the second spouse to pass. But if you don't, we're going to want to look at removing the deceased spouse from title to make things easier in your estate. Also, I want to mention that if you did have an estate plan and the first spouse passed away, if you did any tax planning, you may have some time restrictions to utilize that tax planning in your estate plan. You usually have 9 months from the date of this first spouse to pass to take advantage of the tax planning in your estate plan. And so if that's the case, you want to make sure you talk to an attorney to do that planning within those 9 months from when the first spouse passed away. So we've gone over a lot. So There's a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot of things that need to be done when the first spouse passes away, especially if we don't have an estate plan in place. And so if you are a married couple, it's important that if you haven't done so already, that you get an estate plan in place. It does not have to be complex. It doesn't have to be complicated, but we do want to have an estate plan in place, no matter how simple it may be. If you are a surviving spouse and you need help navigating kind of what to do and how to do it, I'm happy to have a consultation with you to kind of discuss what your needs are. You may or may not need an attorney to help you, but sometimes just having that initial consultation to kind of assess, okay, what do I need to do? How do I go about doing it? And just kind of having a roadmap kind of laid out for you is very helpful. So we have a 1-hour consultation available for you if you would like to do that. So again, I'm Darcel Lobo. I own Dow Law Firm. If you need help with your estate planning, give our office a call. Our number is 206-408-8158. We'd be happy to help you. Again, only if you're in Washington State. I'm only licensed in Washington State. If you are outside of Washington State, again, contact your state bar association to get a referral for an attorney licensed in your state. All right, I hope this helps, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.